My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
I'm Trish Stadler. Today's leadership quote comes from Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done.
The Leader Assistant podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become confident, game-changing leader assistants.
Hi, it's episode 51.
Hey, leader assistants. Today's episode is full of tips and wisdom from my guest, Trish Stadler, but it also deals with a challenging topic of dealing with tragedy and loss in the workplace. She has a very powerful story and unfortunate story about losing an executive. So I just wanted to encourage you to remember that you're not alone if you're dealing with tragedy in your workplace, and to reach out to other assistants who may have experienced similar situations, and just be there for each other, support each other. So I hope this episode reminds you that you're not alone and brings some sort of relief in your pain and loss in the midst of tragedy. So you can find this episode's show notes at leaderassistant.com/51. That's leaderassistant.com/51. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Leader Assistant Podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Burrows, and today I am speaking with Trish Stadler. Trish is a former C-suite executive assistant and founder of Withers in Maine. Trish, how are we doing?
I'm great, Jeremy. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. My kids just started school, so they're getting up a little earlier than I would like, but otherwise things are good.
Right. The routine begins.
Yep. So tell us a little bit about your very first job, and maybe even your first non-real job, and then your first real job, and then kind of what you learned from those experiences that you used throughout your career.
It's such a good question, and I love it. As you know, I love looking back and figuring out, how did I get here? Prior to getting that first actual paycheck, I was the neighborhood babysitter, and literally I could have been a corporation. Bunch of kids on a cul-de-sac, and I was the token babysitter, so I did very well. And what I learned from that, first about myself, was that I'm good at this. I'm good at this, and because I'm good at this, I'm going to be asked to do it again. So it was a very basic lesson of be good at what you do, and more people will notice you. But then moving on to the real world, out of high school, attending the community college in my town, because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. A friend of mine worked at a big Fortune 500 company that was right in our town. I live in New Jersey. And they needed secretarial support, and that's what it was called. And I said, sure, I'll give it a go. I'm in school, but they let me work around my school hours. It was a part-time gig. And as soon as I got in there, I was in my glory. I loved it. I already knew I loved an office atmosphere. My dad had a law practice in our town, and it was right across from the grammar school I went to, and I'd often go there after school and play with all the office machines and smell the files and really go into the supply closet and just get, very excited about that. Pencils and, supplies, shelf upon shelf of supplies. Really just so passionate about it. And then here I was in an actual company that I was working for people other than my dad, or fooling around in his office. Now I'm in the real world, and I'm actually applying this passion here. And again, did a great job, and I was getting very well compensated for it for 18, 19-year-old out of high school. And because they were letting me work around my classes, I found that if I missed a class here and there, I could make a lot more money. And it got to the point where I was making more money than some of my friends were going to be making when they got out of college. Now, that lesson is good only in that if you feel you must go to college in order to make a good living. I'm here to tell you that's not necessarily the case, so I don't discourage anyone from going to college by all means. But here I was doing very well. And I ended up just finishing that first year of community college and not really looking back. I later took classes in later years, but I stuck with this job. And what I, again, took away from it, there was one thing almost in hindsight, but I believe I was also realizing it there because they were involved with something I couldn't really tell you. It was called Engelhard Industries, and they were kind of like a manufacturing plant of sort. And I didn't know a lot about the business itself, but I was still doing very well at what I was doing. And learning more about it and asking a lot of questions because I had to know something, but I didn't need to be an expert in what they were doing. And that was something that I found to be good news because we don't, that came in handy later on when we maybe get into some other of my jobs, but don't not go on an interview for a successful growing company if you aren't familiar with everything they do. You will learn, and if it's something that you're interested in, you'll do fine. But if you don't know every little intricacy of the business, it's not going to impact you if you're really good at what you do. So that began my career of, hey, this is something I can do well, and I ended up taking it from there to the big city. And in this case, on the East Coast, that's New York City, where if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And I went on to have a very exciting and successful career, primarily in the television industry.
So when did you kind of transition from, you know what, I'm really good at this, I enjoy it, I'm passionate about it, to kind of that, okay, now I'm, a senior executive assistant at large organizations at the C-suite, and this is kind of a whole new ballgame?
Right. Well, when I decided to get out of the small town and go into the city, I went to a temp agency, thinking that will be the best way to get me in the door, which the door I wanted to get into was ABC television. I was having lunch with a friend, and we were seeing the soap opera stars walk by, and she had said, "Why don't you work at ABC?" And I was like, that would be awesome. So I went to the lobby and asked the nice person at the front desk if they happen to know what temp agency ABC uses, and it just so happened that person was there because of a temp agency, and she wrote down the name, and I called them, and I was in their offices the next day.
Wow.
And they, I was filling out all the paperwork, and they ask on the application, is there any company that you would like to be placed at? Of course, I wrote ABC. And within a short while of them taking my application back to some back room and reviewing it, the owner of the agency came out and she said, "Can you get to this place, this address by 11:30?" And it was ABC. It was right, 66 in Columbus. And I'm still not that familiar with the city, but I called a friend and they said, just go outside, get on the corner, put your hand up and yell taxi. And gave the taxi driver the address where I had to go. And I made it to that assignment when they needed me there. And it was working in the corporate travel department So again, dating myself a bit because a lot of corporate travel today is outsourced, but there at this point in time, they had an entire well-staffed department that handled travel. As you can imagine, in the television industry, between sports, ABC had sports, and entertainment, people are traveling quite a bit. So it takes a village to get everyone where they need to get to on a regular basis. So being placed in that role, I worked for a very, very stringent, strict boss. And I'm so glad that I did. Now, many people that were placed with this particular person came in the morning and they went out to lunch and they never came back. And I made it through because I was not going to be intimidated. I wanted to work there. I didn't have any feedback about this person. So right away, we hit it off, and I was able to last with her to the point they hired me. They said, okay, she's made it this long, we need to keep her. So I went from temp to staff rather quickly, and that was probably smart of them. And I ended up working in corporate travel for a few years, which I think was the best thing for me to do, because by working in corporate travel, I knew every department. I knew where everyone was going. I knew who was important. Yeah, I knew who got first class, who got business class. I knew a lot about everything just by being in that department. And by working for this very tough person, it gave me a work ethic that stayed with me, stays with me to this day. Just, one of those bosses that, you're going to be on time, you're going to not make mistakes. And a lot of people complained about this person. I think some of the behavior wouldn't fly in today's world, but then if I were to see this person today, I would thank them because they instilled in me a way to conduct myself in that environment. And I thought it was a positive, a challenge, and it made anything after that very easy. So I think did I answer that question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you talked about how, a lot of people left after lunch with that executive. What was kind of, other than just kind of surviving the day, what was kind of something you did to make a good first impression with them? And do you have tips for other assistants who are maybe starting a new job or transitioning to a new executive on, making a good first impression?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most important moments that we have, is that initial meeting. And I don't know really what the secret sauce is per se. All I know is what works for me is I know that this is going, what I want this to be, if it's the interview or the first day, if I want this to be a lasting or at least a comfortable experience for me day after day after day, it's got to start here. And by creating a certain, I could say be confident, be all that. You're not necessarily going to be that, and I don't think I would appreciate somebody telling me that as the best advice, because that may not always be where you're at that exact moment. But if you can just converse in a way that you would converse in, another comfortable exchange of dialogue with somebody else, if you can just draw up where you were at and how that was a conversation that was comfortable, and use that same comfort with this person. They're just another human being, and they need you as much as you need them, and eventually they're going to need you much more than you need them. And that's what you're going to create, is at least in those first exchanges, a way for them to almost immediately be able to say, yes, I can trust this person is going to do this job for me, and I'm going to let them. It's really up to us to educate and put them at ease more than for them to put us at ease. And if we can look at it that way, however that looks for you when you're doing that with somebody that's not your boss, because this person could be, we're having exchanges with people at that level on a regular basis, whether we know it or not, in a coffee shop or somewhere else where there's pleasant, comfortable exchange of conversation. You should be able to bring that into the office of your executive and just start there with this, no tension, no fear. We're in this together. Let's do this. And if you go in with that energy, I can pretty much guarantee it's going to get off to a much better start. It might not get to exactly where you want on that day or that week, but at least you started it off in a way that, they can kind of get a feel for how you're going to operate.
So what about on the other side, from the executive's standpoint, what's something that executives should look for in an assistant when they're maybe hiring or recruiting?
When they're communicating to the HR department the things they're looking for, or when they're actually sitting with the potential candidate?
That's a good point. I would actually love to hear your thoughts on what they're communicating to either a recruiter or the HR department. I don't talk a lot about that. And I think that would be
right.
very, very helpful to just kind of hear your thoughts on that element.
Right. I always hope that the HR department is communicating and taking the time to sit with the executive before they start sourcing candidates. I don't know that that's always the case, but it should be, and I think it would save them a lot of time. Mm-hmm. But to many of their credit, I think they do take the time to maybe not just go by history so much, although that's important. Okay, so another assistant is out. Let's just start sourcing another one. Let's go find out what didn't work. The obvious questions, of course, what didn't work, what does work. But if from the executive standpoint, I'd almost say, aside from quirky little things, because there's not a whole lot they can say, they can't customize the person that's going to come in. They might say, well, someone similar to the CEO's assistant with that level of experience, but also find out, do you want somebody that is interested in doing more than just sitting outside your office and taking care of the tactical items, the scheduling and travel, that might be able to, take on other projects? Yes. Well, that's a different type of person that they're going to be looking for. Of course, the budget and the years of experience are very important. And I think sometimes HR departments are remiss in using just a template and putting, as soon as I see 2 to 5 years experience and it's for chairman or a C-suite, I want to pick up the phone and say, what makes you think someone with 2 to 5 years experience is going to be able to do this job? Or maybe, 5 years perhaps. But even then I'd say you want somebody that's been doing this for about 10 years if you want it to work. There's a lot of variables here, but if it is a high level executive, are they looking for somebody that is coming in with quite a bit of experience under their belt, that has attends meetings, is really someone that's in their life, in their email, in their world. That's good information, but a lot of executives, especially some in the tech industry that are a little bit younger, that aren't quite accustomed to what an EA is all about, may not even realize that that's what they want. They don't know what they don't know. But if they could if the executive could communicate how open they are to having almost a partner versus somebody that's just outside their office. And I think if it's put that way, 9 out of 10 executives will say, I don't want somebody that's just waiting for me to come out and tell them what to do. Mm-hmm. And then now we're talking, okay, so you want somebody that's able to anticipate and really see in advance what's needed, and the only way an EA can do that would be to work for the person for quite some time or to already come in with experience. So I think it's important for the executive to communicate, but you have to be a little, with some caution that they may short themselves by not listing some other attributes that would be very valuable to them. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. So let's kind of go back to your story a little bit. What was the biggest mistake you made as an assistant, and what did you learn from it?
That's a great question, because if EAs did not make mistakes, they wouldn't become great. And I'll tell you a true story. Recently, I was considered for a pretty juicy role, and in my thank you note to the HR person, I literally said I've made a lot of mistakes that made me who I am today. I mean, it was worded a little more eloquently. That might have been a mistake right there, because I didn't get the job. But I think it's funny. I laugh because that's me. I thought that is never a truer statement. If I didn't make some of the mistakes I made, and some of them were so bad, and I'll give you one example, that I will never do it again. You just won't do that again. More than likely, there's a good chance you won't repeat that mistake. So I love that I made mistakes along the way that taught me and became a growth opportunity to not do that again. I remember when I first started off riding horses, and it wasn't that long ago. I was a little late to the party there. And I fell at around the got thrown around the third or fourth lesson. I went, good, I'm glad we got that over with. Now let's carry on. And I haven't fallen or gotten thrown off since. But there was, I think, and I'd be interested to hear if you have ever tallied what category, when assistants answer this question, it falls under. In mine, because I think there is room for error at every turn of the corner when you're booking travel, and mistakes can be made, and your boss is out there somewhere, and oh my goodness. And I come from, I think the fact that I started off in corporate travel when I listed some of the benefits of being able to understand the inner workings of the company, it also made me very adept at booking travel. And it was one of my claims to fame, and still is to today, including international travel. But this was a big mistake with international travel. My boss traveled to India quite a bit at one of my positions, and it's a day ahead or something. You're always working in the next day when they're traveling overseas or to Asia or wherever. And I booked the hotel, but I booked it on, and when you fly to India, you get in the middle of the night. There's no flights getting in at 7 p.m. and then you're going to a nice dinner. You're arriving to your hotel very late. And after lots and lots of travel, you want your hotel room. Well, because I booked it and didn't add the day plus one, it was the day before. So because he didn't show up, they canceled it. So when he arrived the next day in the middle of the night after arduous travel, there was no hotel. And it doesn't sound like the end of the world, but under these circumstances and all the checks and double checks that we always do when he traveled to India, for him to not have a hotel, not only did he not have a hotel, they didn't have a room, and he was in the lobby. Yeah. I said, I'm packing up my desk as we speak. And he laughed. Because I really thought, that's it. It sounds so These are things that can be avoided with proper check, check, check. And I dropped the ball. And the last thing I was going to do was try and point a finger, because we did have an on-site person, but that person wasn't there. And I wasn't going to start. It was me. It was my fault. Easily remedied. I wanted to blame the hotel. All right, you didn't call and say, where is he? We're canceling the room. They don't do that.
Right.
So, I have not done that again, ever.
Well, that's the thing about those types of mistakes. It's like, they're so hard. They're like, oh, I can't believe it. And then you're like, yeah, but I'm never going to do that again.
I'm never going to do that one again. I know, international travel and time, but Outlook is our friend there. And if I used it, I would have seen, he's arriving the next day.
Yeah.
But we are, the important thing there too is, because my boss literally laughed, I beat myself up far harder than he was going to beat me up. And you can't really live in that too long. We have to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to say we've got to take things seriously and take our mistakes and learn from them. But we can't take it personally.
Excellent. That's absolutely right. Because if we do, it's just going to snowball, and it's going to impact how we show up. Absolutely.
So if you could snap your fingers and instantly give all assistants more of something, what would it be?
That is such a wonderful question. And I really sat with myself for a little bit of 100 things I would want to give them. But the most important thing would be each other. I want them to collaborate and network and reach out and use each other. Start within your own company, join the forums, join, what you're doing. A wealth of support and information that is, I can't even put a dollar price on it. It is just an amazing network that has been created, almost like a movement. You're not alone. I would give them each other. We just need to give each of us each other. And it's life-changing.
That's great. Yeah, it's pretty powerful to be in a room with other assistants, or to grab lunch with another assistant. And, because oftentimes our role is pretty siloed, and we feel like we're on an island, especially if we're the only EA in our, direct division. Or in my case, I'm at a startup, and we have 65 employees, and I'm the only EA. So it's always very encouraging and refreshing to sit around the table with other EAs and talk shop.
Absolutely. And I don't think it happens enough. I think we all go into, I saw it I took a contract assignment just to keep myself busy this winter, and I loved it. And I was really pushing to try and get some kind of EA thing going, and it was you'd think I was pushing a boulder up a hill. So not everyone's open to it. It may be out of fear or confusion. I don't really know, but I hope we're making headway there by just people like yourself and Bonnie and the others out there that have really put us on the map and really talked about the the networking aspect of our success. But it can start right in you're on your own there. But just starting monthly lunches with the EAs, not everyone will show up. It's not for everyone. Make it optional. No real agenda. Just the power of that coming together. I've never walked away saying, "Oh, I wish I didn't go to that lunch." I always learned something.
Yeah.
And making friends with each other and saving each other 2 hours. I had an EA that worked in the London office. If my boss was traveling to London, she saved me so much time. She gave me restaurants, hotels, go there, go here. She was my Google, and that's what we could be for each other.
Yeah. Awesome. So do you have any interesting or funny or crazy stories about times when you saved the day? Sometimes big, sometimes small. I mean, EA's saved the day pretty much every day, but anything that kind of stands out in your career as an assistant?
I like to tell the story of the impossible, where I was asked to do something. I had a kind of a celebrity CEO that was very demanding, and I, again, loved it, took the challenge, learned a lot in the short time because I got poached and ended up somewhere else. And it turned out to be for the best. But in that time, I learned things that I still use today. But in this particular case, the executive was traveling and was attending something on the West Coast for, it might have been a concert. And so it was in an auditorium arena type thing, and he left the event and headed to the airport and realized on the way that he left his camera. And this again back before we were really using our phones. And it was a good camera, and the pictures that were taken were meaningful. So he wanted that camera, and he wanted it in his hands before he got on the flight. And this was on this was the next day after the concert, or later in the day. The arena, the auditorium was closed. Nobody was answering the phone. And I quickly, this is where there's always a solution. There's always a way. Called the hotel that was, I believe, across the street from let's say it was the Coliseum. I don't really know the name of the place that this took place in. I kind of blocked it out. Asked for the concierge. Asked the concierge to please do me a solid and go across the street and knock on the window of this Coliseum and try to get somebody. I explained, who this was for, and that person was a VIP that was just staying in their hotel. So they did do this for me. They did find somebody from the maintenance department that was there that opened up the door. I knew the seat number. The concierge went to the seat, got the camera, and messengered it to the airport, and it got into his hands before he got on the plane.
Wow.
When you find somebody to do something like that for you, you send them lots of gifts. You thank them profusely. But that was a win. I think he almost asked it knowing he was getting on that plane without the camera, but I did it. And you just have to be resourceful, and anything's possible.
Awesome.
That's pretty crazy, right?
Yeah. So what about, let's talk a little bit about maybe, your toughest times as an assistant in your career. You went through a tragedy, and, it's not something that's easy to talk about. It's not something that, is, obviously fun or sexy, but it's real life, and it happens to many of us. Most of us experience some sort of tragedy or loss in our life. So could you talk a little bit about that, and maybe how,
Sure,
as you had a kind of a unique angle as an assistant, and then just kind of how you worked through that and over time got out of it?
Sure. So back to that great job at ABC, where I was doing a great job in the corporate travel department. A lot of people were getting to know me, and the people in HR knew me, and they were in the midst of recruiting for the executive producer of ABC Sports. They were looking for an assistant, and according to them, anyone that they were bringing to him were not working out. And they figured, since I worked out with this person in the travel department, that I might be good to put before the executive producer here. And sure enough, they called me into HR. Would you be interested? And I thought, oh my gosh, sports. Now I knew something about sports, but did I know everything about sports? No. I did bone up a little bit, at least, on what I needed to know to be actually in the ABC sports department. Fortunately, like I said, I worked in travel. I knew we covered college football and Monday Night Football and all those great things, so I wasn't completely in the dark. But I didn't need to know, what a running back does. And I was kind of getting into that minutia. And I finally just said, whoa, I know enough.
Sports ball.
Yeah. I mean, it was, how much do I need to know? I don't think they're looking for that. I'm not coming in to produce one of their events. So they teed me up. I went to meet with Jack, and it was, he had me at hello. I was expecting this, person that was going to be very intimidating. I couldn't understand why they couldn't find somebody to work for this man. He was, perfect. And I worked for ABC Sports. It was the best job. I've had so many great jobs, so many great bosses, but this definitely is top, one or two. You have to understand, here I am working at one of the best, sports TV companies. They have all the great events. Lots changed since then. But at the time we had, everything. And all I had to say was, I work at ABC Sports, and I was the coolest person in the room. And I loved it. I loved working for Jack. I loved working for ABC. It was a great company. Everything was great. And things were starting to change. ESPN was coming into play. And Jack, my boss, had just told me that he was going to be leaving ABC. They were bringing in somebody else, as things happen in that world, and probably going over to Major League Baseball, and that I would go with him. But before he went, because one of our big events that we covered was the Tour de France, the company, as a goodwill or whatever, wanted him to still take that trip. He was bringing his wife and his daughter, who was a French student at the time. And so he decided he would continue with the plans to go to Paris, mostly because he was, he had told his wife and daughter that they would come along. And it would be the last hurrah and the last event for Jack to do for ABC Sports. And so we booked the flights to Paris. Jack was always very savvy about booking he wouldn't book his own travel, of course, but he would do some research and hand me flights that he would like to take. So I worked with my VIP travel person in our corporate travel department. We were very close, and we knew that this was Jack's final trip for the company, and so we switched the flight from the one he chose to the TWA flight. Got him, upgraded all the way, from soup to nuts, and off he went. And about 8:30 that night, home, and I get a call from a friend of mine that I worked with, and she said, "Is that Jack's flight?" And I had the news on in the background, and I ironically was just unpacking. I had moved into a new place, and I wasn't paying that close attention, but she kept asking, "Is that Jack's flight?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "There's a flight down in the Long Island Sound." And it was about 8:30. I said, "No, his flight left a while ago. He called me from the airport." And she's like, "Well, I don't know. Do you know his flight number?" Normally I would. This was the last time he was going to be traveling. I normally have the itinerary with me. Did not have it with me. I hung up on my friend. I called my travel guy. I had his home number. And I asked him, "Sean, is that Jack's flight?" And he wasn't answering me. And then he said, "Yeah, I said, "What's his flight number?" He said, "That's his flight, Trish." And that the rest is kind of a blur. The top, the one thing you'll know as the assistant, you're so important at that point because the top brass needs to know for sure, did Jack board that flight? Yes. Yes, Bob Iger. Jack boarded that flight. Yes. So once they determine that, they go into, what they need to do for Jack's family, for his staff. And I can't tell you enough how wonderful they were to me. The very next day, they had grief counselors, priests, rabbis gathered in the conference room. I didn't get there. I got there a little late. They waited till I arrived, and this was the entire ABC Sports department entered the conference room and got all the support that I needed. And the rest was just, putting one foot in front of the other. However, like I mentioned, his wife went, his daughter went. There was no, people would see me days after and weeks after sitting outside his office, and they couldn't even come up to me. It was just too sad. He did have two sons. They were twin boys. They chose not to go to Paris. They were staying behind to go to basketball camp. So the whole story is so tragic. So back at that time and surrounding that time and for a good time after that, I definitely was not the impact it had on me and everything that was going to happen going forward was immense in so many ways. But the thing I remember the most was the support that I got from the company and my colleagues. And I took time off. After a while, it got to be too much, I think, for everybody to have me there. And I patched myself up the best I could, and the company had me come back, and I asked if I could work in another department, and I ended up at ABC News. And that opened other doors for me. It was still, and to this day, it's several years later, it's something that stays with me, but I let it be more about what I learned from all of it, what I got from that, what I learned from a man like Jack O'Hara. And I don't put that on, I want every job to be like this and every boss to be like this, but he kind of taught me, what a great working relationship really looks like. And I knew, that it's possible that, if somebody tells you that somebody's a tough person to work for, disregard that, because there was nothing about that was remotely what I found in this man. But like I had mentioned to you when we talked about this earlier, there wasn't a whole lot of people that could understand in the way that they went through this. And it wasn't until I went to a conference that I heard another assistant who had a similar experience talk about it from the podium, and I almost fell off my chair. And it was just almost like I found you, there's not many of us, and we embraced each other afterwards. She also had, because I always kind of, that one part that really makes people, gasp a little bit is that, I, being the good executive assistant, found a better flight for him. So the important thing that I missed saying about part of the recovering from that was stop blaming myself. I'm not that powerful. I didn't make the plane go down. And I think I was taking on a little bit too much ownership for that tragedy, and it was halting my ability to move on. And this assistant had a similar thing where she had told the person's significant other who wasn't going to go on that flight, why don't you go? You should go. And she ended up going. So she lived with that, and this is heavy stuff, right,
Yeah.
Jeremy? It's like it's giving you probably chills but these are some of the things that executive assistants will face. And there's probably some listening out there that are shaking their head like, we're in the hot seat, and we've got, all kinds of things that we're dealing with. And I think the important thing is, how are we going to deal with it? And I'm not going to say that I didn't melt down and have every reaction and every emotion that you can imagine, but I talked to the right people, and again, with the support of the company, and taking that blame off myself was the best way to start coming out of that. We are responsible for a lot, but we certainly we're not in the outcome business either. So that's important to remember. So, I appreciate that we kind of went down this road, because I think it's important to talk about it. It's going to come up for some of those EAs out there. We have very busy traveling bosses.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing. Obviously, it's a tough story to go through, but I know there are a lot of tragedies in different ways with people's families, people's executives. I had a couple scenarios at my last job where one of my good friends / coworkers unexpectedly had a heart attack, and you just kind of, as the EA to the CEO or the EA to the founder, I was I was a friend of the guy, but I also was EA. So, I was like, okay, well, I'm still having to try to figure out how to help with the funeral and, help plan take care of the family and make sure, it's just a tough, interesting, unique position to be in.
Yes, well said, because I was very involved with helping the family with the list of names and how to contact many of Jack's colleagues within the company and outside of the company. And the family, such a gracious family, couldn't have been more thankful for my help. But I said, how can I be of service at that point, and just carry on that way? Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that you mentioned was, you were at a conference, I think you said, when you heard the story from the other assistant, and you're like, oh, I finally found somebody that can relate. Were you at an assistant conference? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
It was a conference for executive assistants. So more to my thing, we're not alone, and we need to put ourselves at these places so we can find our people.
Yeah, just stepping out of your comfort zone and going to a conference and meeting other EAs. Yeah, something like that. That meeting for you was very powerful in your healing process. And so, yeah, I think that's just more confirmation that networking with other like-minded EAs is very, very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, you never know. You never know what's going to come of it. I still reap the benefits of attending conferences with my contacts. That last job that I went on, that juicy job, I was referred to by somebody that I met at a conference, that we sat on a panel together, and we've stayed friends. We're in touch. We see each other for coffee. And she thought of me when she saw a position, because she knew my background. That would never happen if I didn't go to that conference. So I highly recommend.
Yeah. Well, Trish, thanks so much for, again, sharing your story and taking time out of your day. We didn't get to talk a lot about your kind of coaching and administrative professional speaking that you've done in your career, but where can we find info about that, and how can we support what you're up to?
Yes, thank you. And this was amazing. I enjoyed it very much. I am found at my website, www.withersandmain.com. I am still, doing corporate work because I like to be in the trenches, but I'm available for mentoring and coaching because I love it so much. And it was a path that I kind of almost accidentally went down, and I'm enjoying it so much that when I'm in between gigs, I am coaching and and I am seen on as many of the EA forums on Facebook as possible. So you might see me comment here and there when I see somebody struggling with something and I feel I can give some advice from my own experience. I will always do that.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, and I'll share all those links on the show notes so people can find you and reach out and say hi. And thanks so much. And
awesome.
We'll talk soon.
Talk soon, Jeremy. Thank you.
Thanks again to Trish for sharing her story. Very powerful. Hope it was comforting to you. Just a reminder to reach out to other assistants, network. You're not alone. And you can check out the show notes at leaderassistant.com/51.
Please review on Apple Podcasts. GoBulls.com